Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Cyber PMM podcast. Today, on this episode, I'm joined by Christopher Crowley, who is a cybersecurity consultant with Montance LLC, which focuses on security operations, and is also an instructor at the SANS Institute. He has been in cyber for over 20 years, so I'm super excited here, and I really mean it when I say I'm super excited this time to have Chris with us today. Chris, thanks for joining.
Yeah, happy to be here, and thank you very much for setting it up so that we can chat a bit.
Absolutely. Let's start with kind of your background. How you said in cyber, I think we were talking before this started, over 20 years, 22 years, 25. Tell us about that progression. How did you get into the field and where you're at today?
So I got into cyber as a sort of an unwitting participant, but let me back up to where my first job in computers was, which was in the 1980s when I was in high school. And so it's like I was actually doing systems administration stuff as a high school student for a company nearby where I grew up in Massachusetts. They basically decided that they just needed a kid to come in after school and run tape for tape backup, as in literally put the tape on the reel-to-reel tape machine to be able to allow the systems administrators to go home but still back up the stuff for the day, which is why when I hear people getting victimized about crypto-locking ransomware, I'm like, I thought we fixed that operationally in the 80s. Because that's what I used to do for work manually. And then my job basically went away when we could just put this tape in the tape deck. And then that had a month's worth of backups. So somehow people haven't learned that lesson now, 40 years later. So anyways, that was when I started in IT stuff, really. But then cybersecurity, I was working at Tulane University, or I started working in this particular role at Tulane in 2000. And I was working doing systems administration on Solaris systems, AIX, HPUX, a little bit of BSD kind of stuff. And then we started having problems where it was like people reported that they were receiving emails from people they didn't know. And then there was another thing where it was like the mass spec in the chemistry department started acting weird, and we had to go figure out what was going on with it. And then the FBI showed up and said that the Beowulf cluster in the physics department had been compromised for the last several weeks, and they've been using it to collect information on the people who are the threat actors. And they were done collecting everything that they thought that they needed, so they wanted it taken offline. And so that's how I got involved in cybersecurity. Was I just started encountering problems on the systems that I was helping to manage and had to deal with it. And this is the other thing, and I don't want to talk about this very much because it literally makes me cry when I think about it, is that in 2005, I went through a major disaster recovery effort because I was working for Tulane when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, and that was a substantial mess. So it was like, in addition to all of the cyber stuff, I also had this disaster experience, which was fascinating and substantial lesson to learn, but it really is something that most people haven't actually experienced that. And it's something that, operationally, when you think about preparation for business continuity, most people have never gone through an actual disaster. And I, unfortunately, did. So it's something that,
and that was
really informs my current stance. It was huge. It was one of the early ones. And not only did we have a lot of the IT stuff affected for us, but our cell phones stopped working. All the comms were gone. I mean, and people were learning how to text message, but literally, I think I still have the phone somewhere where it's like literally it was one of those Nokia, things where you had to hit two, 3 times in order to get a C character. That was what our comms were reduced to. So
no, I mean, just for context, for if you're younger and weren't around in that time or whatever, I was actually just about to graduate college, and Katrina hit, and I remember we did like a trip as a university. They selected students to go down there, and I was on that trip. And I'll never forget walking around New Orleans. We were part of the cleanup crew. There were cars and trees. It was nuts.
Something you've never seen. Something you've never seen.
It was an epic disaster for sure. Wow. So that's being thrown into
just a little bit
crisis
about my
response. Yeah. So you've seen some crises, and probably over 20 plus years, you've seen more than that.
A bunch of incidents. Yeah. And so then when I left New Orleans I started working remotely, and then I moved to the DC area. And then I sort of drifted on into the government contracting stuff, and then started working for National Institute of Health, Department of Energy, Department of Defense. And I did a bunch of cyber stuff for all of those different government agencies. And then I started doing training through SANS Institute, and about, I'll call it 13 years ago, if my memory is fading, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of crammed
Just
full of
jumbles
stuff.
together at some point. Yeah.
About 13 years ago, I basically left full-time employment and started
Hmm.
doing consulting and teaching and all that stuff. So that's when Montance, when I created that. And
Hmm.
then I continued to do the instruction for SANS, and I do that to this day. I do work with IANs from a consulting engagement. A lot of the bigger customers that I work with goes through IANs, but then I do independent engagement, maturity assessments on security operations and other things. So that's
Now,
that's kind of
it's
me up
yeah.
to current date. Yeah.
All right. It's not a day in cyber if I don't learn another acronym, and I think I might need to ask you, what is IANS? I know.
IANS. So IANS is a company
Okay.
that helps organizations by basically what they do is they have a pool of experts in cybersecurity, and then
Hmm.
these companies have engagements through IANS, and then they can sort of like pick and choose or ask questions, and then it facilitates the connection with the expert. So if someone wants to ask me a question and do it in a sort of a consulting basis, I, as an individual, I'm not going to stand up a contract with somebody to answer a question, right? It just
Right.
doesn't work like that. But what these companies do with IANS, which is a company based out of Boston, is they actually have an engagement with them, which is kind of like a subscription basis. And then they say, hey, we've got this question. Do you have anybody who has expertise on SIM implementations? And so then they come to me and other people like me and they say, hey, what do you know about this specific SIM? Can you help
Hmm.
this company over here? And so it's basically like an expert pool
Hmm.
strategy, and they have other products too, but that's really sort of like the approach that's there. And then it's just something that I've been working with them for a few years. So
Very cool. All right. Learn something new every day, don't we? Let's pivot. So, security
okay.
operations is your mainstay at this point, and SecOps has definitely been an area I've been most interested in and involved in for my own personal career. And
Mhm.
so, let's talk SecOps. I would love to do that. And then, full disclosure, Chris, you and I have worked together on projects. I think back in the day, looking at the SANS SOC survey, for example, that was a project that I had been participating in and sponsored at one point. And I've always loved that survey. I think it is one of the few in the industry that really shows and highlights using research across a broad range of analysts, SecOps analysts, security analysts, and SOC directors, et cetera, to just dig into what's the state of the state in terms of SecOps, right? It happens annually, I believe. And why don't you give us the background? Like, how did that survey originate? Was it,
Sure.
and where is it? Take us through like how it's
Right.
progressed from that kickoff till today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for the compliment. I try. Right. I mean, it's like sincerely, I'm trying to do something, which is to provide something that's a reasonably objective reference for people that they're able to point at that and say, hey, this is what my peers are doing. This is probably where we should start to direct our efforts. So it started off many years ago. So this is the 8th year. So that would be 17 was the first year that I wrote it. 17. Maybe I have to check that. You can fact check me. Like I
I
said,
will. I'll
the
look in.
exact years. Yeah, the exact years. So that's something that, as part of what I was doing with the SANS Institute at the time, I was doing basically a summit. And so the intention was, hey, let's get a bunch of people and actually ask them what they're doing, because then we can share that information. And this is something that the SANS Institute does well. They do that. It used to be called the Analyst program. Now I think it's called the Research program, but whatever. So started in 17, sort of an extension of the SOC summit, which is a lot more people were starting to say, hey, we need to build this SOC. Some of that was driven through requirements, legal requirements, contractual requirements that you monitor. And then there was this sort of question that a lot of people had, and it was literally an existential question. Okay, we need a SOC. What is that? Right. And so there were all these different acronyms that, kept floating around. There was the CERT, CERT, the CIRT. People needed an incident response team, cyber incident response team. And then there was the security operations. And so it became this existential question. What does a SOC do? That was an
Mm,
important one, and it continues to be an important one. And again, I'm not going to refer too heavily to the details of the SOC survey, but just one thing. that I've asked every year that the survey is run is, what do you do? If you think you have a SOC, what is it? What is your functional or capabilities that exist that make that a SOC? It's interesting to me, and I've tried to articulate this in most of the reports. The people who answer the survey tend to be pretty consistent in terms of saying these are the things that we do, either internally or outsourced. And so that has been sort of like the initial thrust, is like, let's just have a consensus on what it is that we're supposed to
Yeah.
do.
Like a definition of terms. Let's start
Yeah,
there. And
exactly.
yeah.
And this is what maybe the dictionary says, but this is what people say that they actually do. And there are all sorts of little permutations on but that was probably the single most important question in terms of the origination of it. Then let me also mention one other thing, just in terms of how it's changed over the last several years. Quite honestly, I've tried to keep it somewhat static so I can show trends over the years.
Right.
And this year, I actually had multiple trend graphs. I'm sorry, when I say this year, in the 24 report, because the 25 questions are open as of right now. They don't close until the end of March, I think is the timing on that. But so in the 24 report, I showed several multi-year trends of either this is changing or this is stable. And so I've really tried to preserve questions that warrant preservation. And then I've changed things. One thing that I changed substantially starting in 2020 was I now release the de-identified answers to the responses so that other people can do follow-on analysis. And quite honestly, it's like, I want you to verify what I'm seeing, because I might have made a mistake. We might have made a mistake, myself and Barbara Filkins, who is, focused on the data aspect of it, and the folks at SANS Institute. And it's like, we look at it and I see something, but somebody who's a statistician may look at it and say, oh, but there's this. So that's one valuable thing. The other thing is that I release a Jupyter Lab notebook, so you can do some Python analysis along with that. But that comes from a question that was in, I think, 2018 or 2019. Someone messaged me and said, hey, Chris, here's what I want. Like, you got the report, and the report that you're doing is basically like everybody. He said, let me just tell you, I work for an enormous financial institution that has, X $100 million in revenue annually and this many employees. And he said, quite honestly, I don't care what small IT entities are doing. I only care what my actual peers are doing.
Right.
And by peers, he meant companies exactly like me. And so I helped him to answer that question, but effectively I was like, well, wait a minute. Everybody has that question. I'm doing this in general, and I have to do that from the perspective of the report, but everybody, quite honestly, only cares about them. And I can't blame you for that, right? I mean, that's real.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
so maybe it's
so
like you have that overview trends, right? You
Yeah.
have your overview kind of views of what's going on from a trending, but then it's like, all right, how do we measure this from peer to peer group and get some analysis on different company sizes or other demographics, right?
And the demographics are pretty substantial because we ask a lot of demographics questions. I only care about the APAC region. I only care about South America. I only care about Europe. I only care about financial organizations of this size or greater that are headquartered in Europe. And you can actually do that in the stuff that I'm releasing. And I've been releasing that for 4 years now. And again, I basically, I don't know if you know much about the data stuff, but like there's this concept of ETL, extract, transform, and load, which is a royal pain if you have to do that. I mean, not well, because it's, I'm a bit of a hack when it comes to programming, but I have basically done all of that ETL stuff so that people can just have the data frame and it's there. And of course it's de-identified, and I do that in a somewhat automated way, but I also manually review it because I'm really fearful about any little detail that people include filtering through. I don't want to release that. And we tell people, don't put stuff in there, and I obviously sanitize out if people include names and emails and IP addresses and anything like that. But still, it's like I'm very conscientious about the privacy associated with it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you should. And that brings us probably to what you've been finding. So you've been running this for years, and year after year, you're seeing some cool trends. Anything
Yep.
standing out?
Yeah.
Obviously, the latest trend and revolution in AI is probably coming up into a new question, or is that something you're leaving out still?
AI.
What's
Let me
going
talk
on
about
there?
let me talk about AI because
All right.
I actually there was something that I pointed out in the 24 survey that I think is really important is that I added
Hmm.
AI as a technology in 24.
Oh,
Actually,
you
sorry,
did. Okay.
I added it for
Great.
the first time in 23, and so
Oh,
there's
okay.
this whole technology satisfaction section, and
Right.
that's in there, and it's fine, and I'm not going to read it to you. If people are interested, they can go look at it. But I
Yep.
added AI as a specific technology, and basically the things around it were that people were really unhappy with it as a technology. First off, so the way that I asked the question is essentially, do you use this technology? If you do, give it a grade A, B, C, D, or F. And then the other part of the question is, where are you in the deployment state related to that technology? And so these deployment states end up being full production deployment, the partial production deployment. I'm trying to get the exact names. Implementing, purchased but not implemented, or planned. So you haven't bought it yet, but it's like it's a project that's in there. So AI in the 24 report, the highest response for implementing, that is, you're in the midst of implementing it, was analysis, which is a section I have in the technology, and then AI or machine learning generative GPT. So that was the highest single quantity of responses with 51 was generative AI of some form. The second highest was AI or machine learning generally with 48 responses. So that is very clearly, and I mean, this is everybody feels this, but it's also reflected here. Everybody's attempting to implement that. And it's not just the general AI stuff, but it's specific to the sort of pre-trained transformers or GPT things that are there. But what's really interesting about that is of the technology satisfaction, that's the grade, the lowest was AI in terms of
Huh.
satisfaction.
Interesting.
So everybody's doing it and people are saying we don't like it. Now, I think that that'll change. I think
Yeah.
but it's an interesting trend that I'm monitoring is that in in 23, right, it was second to last, right? It was second to last. In 23, the very lowest was network packet analysis. But in 24, the AI, because I
AI.
now had two things, now is the bottom two were AI. What's also interesting about that is it was a lower low in 24 from 23. And I said, well, maybe because it's different people, it's not controlled. I said, maybe it's just people are grading harder in 24 versus 23. And so I analyzed that. I looked at
Yeah.
that. In fact, no, there was a higher high in 24, and on average it was higher in terms of grades, but still the lower low expressed greater dissatisfaction than before, and it was focused on AI. So that's what I'm saying in terms of a trend of
Yeah.
AI for people out of the
Right.
security operations space. They're doing it and they don't like it, and they're frustrated by it. So
And you
GPA
also
was
measure things.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting to hear. Yeah, I'm going to be watching that one to see what comes out in the next report and if that trend changes. Because, like you said, with
Fair.
the
Yeah.
advancements happening, and
Yep.
maybe, I see a lot of chatter in the industry as well about trying to really get the AI enabled SOC in terms of technologies and what that means and how
Mm-hmm.
that can actually be operational. There's a lot of work happening by startups and others, and yeah, let's watch that one. But you also, outside of technologies, you're measuring things like, I don't know if it's called quality of life or like work life balance,
Mm-hmm.
because you hear this, that security analysts have the toughest job in the industry on the front lines. And so is there a section there? I can't remember
Oh yeah. Oh
that.
yeah.
There
So
is.
yeah,
Okay.
let me talk about a couple of things related to employees, employment satisfaction, and so on. So, and again, to me, this is all part of operations.
Mm-hmm.
We need people. You need to have skillful people. And, it's like, so that is an important thing for me in terms of how do you operate something? If year after year, you're trying to have a stable, effective, efficient, and I'll say not just effective, but cost effective.
Yeah.
So people are an important part of that. So one of the trends is that in 20 the average duration, because I asked the question, how long do people stay in your SOC on average? And in 24, the 3 to 5 years actually exceeded the number of responses, which is the first time in the history of me doing it.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like it
Interesting.
basically the response was people are staying longer.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can't address why they're staying longer necessarily, because it could be economic, it could be companies are doing a better job of retaining, it could, any of these things. But I'm not going to speculate on that. But I am going to say that in the response count, for the first time, 3 to 5 years as the average duration was actually the highest number, just barely, but still like a substantial change from the order from previous years. And then the
Interesting.
other thing that was interesting about that to me is that the top three retention techniques, and again, this is less work-life balance and more of like, as an organization, what can you do to facilitate this? Because it's a general agreement that SOC, especially tier one SOC analyst, is kind of a burnout position. You go in, you have to do it. It's your entry level thing. You have to do it for a period of time and then you get out as quickly as you can. Like that is something that I have seen multiple people reporting. You go look at, actually, Alyssa Torres did a talk several years ago where she like pulled all these snippets of like career guidance that people had, which is you go into the SOC, you get out as fast as you can. And if you stay there for a while, then you're basically going to get stuck. So the most effective method that was the top in 24, which it actually moved from the lowest of the top three in 23, was meaningful work. And money is in there, and career progression is the other one. These have been the top three for most of the years that I've written the survey, but the meaningful work has become actually the top of the list of what people are saying is the way to retain people. And this also means that people no longer feel like they're just like taking a ticket out of the sim and something that could have been automated. They have to do it, right? And you started to allude to this of like, how do we have the AI enabled SOC? And
Right.
I wanted to comment on that, but let me fold this into my answer here.
Sure.
The AI enabled SOC is the thing that is also what we're trying to do with a lot of the automation and orchestration technologies, is stop trying to turn people into machines and stop trying to turn machines into people. Get the people to think and do the things that are interesting challenges for them to work on, that actually provide that sort of like relevance and meaningfulness to what they're doing on a daily basis. And if you are forcing people to just become as routine as possible, you're missing the opportunity for efficiencies, and you're missing the opportunity for leveraging the human brain in the way that it should be used, which is complex synthesis of complex information and difficult challenges, where you're able to actually have that sort of organizational relevance. And this is where MSSPs fall down, technologies also often fall down, which is why do we care, and why do we need to make an exception in this case versus not in that case? Humans are great at that once they become familiar with the circumstances. So
Yeah, no, it's a good paradox because you have automation, which promises to just do things automatically, but you still need obviously humans to configure and connect and plug together everything. And so I think your point is well taken. It's not just turning an on switch, right?
No, and the automation, which is the way that we can actually get to the point where we can even hope to keep up with the massive volume of stuff that we need to do. The automation needs to be carefully tested and sort of like incrementally expanded. But most organizations don't have the patience to take this very cautious sort of approach to, let's automate a little, let's push it out a little, let's do that. They want this big on off switch, which you're never going to get. You know, you really aren't. You're going to have to calibrate and trust over time That's the recipe for success in automation. And it's something that, again, with customers that I work with and the way that I see people doing this, it's great. But I don't need a big AI machine to come in. I need little narrowly capable AI tools that my analysts can trust to do things to help them, rather than just like, okay, let me plunk this brain down in there and it's going to fix everything and redo all of our workflows and automations and stuff. That's not what AI is actually capable of doing to help us now. And in my opinion, for the next 3 to 5 years, it's still all going to be very narrow in that regard.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
your future vision, like where you see the SOC heading in 3 to 5 years, to tie that off, you see it incrementally improve. There's not going to be some drastic difference from what today. In other words, it's
Yeah, I would say that. I would
okay.
say that let me project a couple of things, and these are my speculations based
Okay.
on what I see. And of course, experts in their field are notoriously bad at predictions.
Yeah.
But here's where I think things are going. Number one, the inclusion of AI is mostly going to be through vendor inclusion. So
Okay.
let me just whatever your SOAR tool is, whatever your ticketing tool is, you're going to be using AI in your SOC, but really it's your, and I don't want to say a specific vendor, but your whatever ticketing tool, that's going to have AI embedded that they have developed to make their tool work better. Now you're using AI. Right. So there's this great McKinsey characterization of AI that I think was the 23 or the 24 like state of AI report, where they basically put people in three buckets. Bucket number one, you're just a user of somebody else's tool that has AI in it. I see a lot of that for the SOC.
Mm-hmm.
Bucket number two is you're able to subtly enhance or customize uh, other people's provided SOC AI tools into the SOC.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea would be for the second bucket is you have Copilot,
Yep.
because I'll call that out, or ChatGPT or whatever. You have
Yep.
that because your organization has it, and you figure out how to take the ticket that your analyst is working and just turn that into a report automagically, using that as
Mm-hmm.
part of your operational workflow through customized templates. And everybody loves talking about the rags, but retrieving data from another thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's just like,
Right.
okay, now we're
Yep.
now we're orchestrating, which is actually all it is.
Mm-hmm.
We're orchestrating across multiple disparate systems to integrate data to be able to produce that report, notification, bulletin, threat intelligence, whatever. That's sort of like the second bucket from the McKinsey report, and I see people doing that too. And then the
Okay.
third bucket is you build your own. And as
Mm.
somebody who's like looking at TensorFlow stuff and implementing this and doing this work also in order to help organizations to do this effectively, there is going to be a very small percentage of people who are going to do that they're actually going to fund their own SOC to be able to have the sort of, I'm going to use a term, data science
Yeah.
that would enable them to do machine learning.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a lot of that, but the people who do that, they're going to have, I'll just say, detectors as a good example. They will have detectors that threats won't be able to practice against, like they can currently practice against in like the commodity security defenses. So you'll have tripwires that you built on your own that
Mm-hmm.
are going to trip up threats or intruders,
Okay.
that's going to tip it to your advantage. And
Interesting.
I actually love that as a concept. I think
Yeah.
that operationally it's hard to get there at first, but once you can prove that value to your organization and you have a couple of people in your SOC who are skillful, knowledgeable, and have the time to be able to implement those sorts of things, this is actually going to be a cool circumstance, because what I
Yeah.
also see happen is, and I'm just going to, again, like the ISACs as an example, the information sharing communities, all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden there's going to be back channel sharing of these home built, home trained AI tools. And that is absolutely going to provide value. And then the vendors, your detective vendors, your EDR, XDR, network detection response, those vendors are going to figure out that that's going on, and they're going to start to tap that as well. So it's going to be this sort of like organic growth, and that's going to help to facilitate the
Yeah.
better detections of
So in
things.
summary, it's building customized tripwires in like home lab type environments for the technology type analyst that's
Yep.
inventing stuff, and he's or she's putting together these detections that are tripping up
Mhm.
adversaries, and but it's just like a one-off development. It's not yet fully
Yes.
adopted, and so that innovation path for cyber is going to speed up in a sense because we're going to get more examples of these types of innovations coming out from really smart analysts that are trying to do their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, yes, essentially what you're saying is that, but what I would characterize that as, number one, the analysts don't necessarily even need to be really smart. They just need to have the time to develop
The
it.
time,
Number one.
right?
Number two, the other thing that's a nuance that I'm trying to express that maybe you didn't catch in your recap is, and it's trained on your network, your host, your whatever, because
Right.
your place is different than everybody else's place. And so the distinction that an ML machine learning tool could learn based on your stuff can only be developed really well on your environment. Now, that being said, of course, if I have massive treasure troves of data across everything, I might be able to do a better job building some sort of a general detector. But
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying is the detections that matter most to me, to my network, to my team, really are going to be derived from my ability to customize and train on the things that are unique and distinctive in my environment. And if people are
Interesting.
thinking like that, it's not going to work for everything, but for some things it's going to be exceptionally effective just for you. Most SOCs aren't there today, and they probably won't get there in the next 3 years. I'm saying the better SOCs are going to endeavor to do that, and they're going to be doing that over the next couple of years. And if your SOC starts today to even just do a little tiny bit of that, and you
Mm-hmm.
have that small percentage of time from two analysts, 5%, 10% over the course of a year to figure out how to do it, to figure out what problems that would be applied to that are useful, and then implement that, train it, operationalize it as a detective capability unique to you, and then basically learn from that and expand it and improve it over time. 2 years from now, that's going to be pretty damn good,
And
but
it,
it's not
it won't be
tomorrow.
a core. It won't correlate or necessarily depend on the number of analysts, right? Because I know in the report it talks about how many analysts do you have in the SOC, and that's usually
Yeah.
like a metric of how mature
Yeah.
your SOC is. But that's going to go away in this model you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting too. How many analysts does the SOC have? And I'm not even going to look at the chart, but 2 to 10. It's always been 2 to 10 is always the top number, and I've tried to sort of like correlate that to organization size, and it's interesting. It's really interesting. Big organizations, you know what they answer? 2 to 10. Small organizations, 2 to 10 people, and the why
Yeah.
for that's really interesting in my opinion. And we're sort of shifting away from what I was just talking about to the concept of how many staff do you have. I don't necessarily agree that the number of staff is a good indication of how mature you are. I think that as SOCs become more mature, they don't substantially increase headcount because what they do is outsource. They just outsource all the things that they don't want to do, and as they become more mature, they're much more focused, and the staff who are present are less generalized and more focused, and they're able to actually perform better because the MSSP is handling the SIM, and the MSSP is handling the routine detections, and the managed detection and response, the MDR, is handling all of the routine host based stuff because they
Yeah.
in because it's routine. And so the really mature SOCs have learned to just push those things away and focus
Hmm.
on the other problems.
Now, let me ask you this. Jensen Huang and NVIDIA, and
Mhm.
I'm glued to his keynotes every time because there's just been so much development happening.
Yeah.
And one of the things he showed, this whole trend of like generative AI and then agentic AI and then robotics,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
We're in this phase, like they're saying this is the year of AI agents, and you see it
Mhm.
everywhere, right?
Mhm.
You're talking about outsourcing. Do you foresee a future where that outsourcing is actually can be done to agents?
Yep.
Where, okay, yeah,
Definitely. Definitely.
definitely,
But I mean, it's a matter of how much do you trust your managed detection and response to do the right thing on your endpoint, and just use that as a. Do you care if your MDR has an analyst reviewing it or has some sort of an automated, agentic AI doing it? Do you
right,
care if they're you do care if they're 90% only? If they're 95%, you care less. If they're 99%, you don't care.
yeah,
If 1 in 100 of the routine handlings goes a little off on a workstation, you'll tolerate that. And again, I'm
yeah,
generalizing, but if 1 in 100 of the routine things, especially if it fails on the side of being overly constraining,
yeah.
what are you going to say? Okay, we need a better way to, when someone gets interrupted, get them a new laptop immediately, or a secondary work thing. We have this online thing where you go to a personal computer and you do your work through whatever cloud PC. That's our backstop for if the MDR, and again, managed detection and response on an endpoint, if the MDR gets overly aggressive, switch to this on a personal computer. Like,
Well,
again,
yeah,
from
and
an operational perspective, that's tolerable if we only make the mistake 1 in 100 times. 1 in 1,000 times, you won't even think about it.
right. And that brings, so if there's people watching or listening to this that are like, man, I really want to break in and work in a SOC as an analyst, but I don't feel like I have the skills. Where, and this is like pulling on the SANS cord a little bit
Hmm.
here. Where do you
Hmm.
see the most gaps in terms of skills that SOCs actually need? Like if you're going to go apply or train up, what would
Yeah.
you advise there?
I'm laughing because there is a question in here somewhere about like what do you hire for? What are your
Oh, there you go.
technical skill
Perfect.
gaps and so on? So know the SIM, know the EDR. If from a technology perspective, understand SIMs, understand EDRs. And I'm not even looking at the chart, but those are the ones off of the top of my head. From a training perspective, SANS is great. There's a whole bunch of free resourcing that's out there. You go to any of the big free technology trainings just as a start and do a search for free SOC analyst training. Right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like
Start
that'll
there.
give you an indication of it. And I'm sorry to report though, to be a good SOC analyst, you need to know something about host-based stuff. You need to know something about network stuff. You need to know something about cloud. You need to know something about threat actors. So it's like it actually is this. It's this pretty broad spectrum of IT knowledge plus cybersecurity knowledge plus threat knowledge. And
Mm,
and if you don't have that, you're really just like barely competent. And
hmm.
and maybe somebody will like let you come in as an entry level kind of thing, but entry level for a SOC analyst is like you understand the way the computers work and the way that they talk to one another on the network and the way that threats are compromising that and how to do investigations.
Yeah. So it's like,
Doesn't sound
no,
entry level.
no, yeah, you got to know IT at the basic level. You have to know cyber tools, the
Yeah.
most commonly used cyber tools, and understanding of threats and threat actor landscape and things of that nature. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good tips. And
Yeah. And it's
if you
hard. It's
were,
hard to do that.
yeah, it is. Those are like three areas by themselves that are complicated, right?
Mhm.
But like you said, start small, incrementally get there through some free trainings that are out there, and you can
Yep.
be on your path, right? It won't be overnight, but you can get there.
Nope.
And then for product marketers, right? Because this is more this podcast, and
I know your
it's
thing.
right. Yeah, it's a thing we do. I do, but all of this is related in some sense, but specifically focused on those of us that are taking technologies that we've looked at a little bit here and that are covered in the SOC survey. Any recommendations on how we can resonate better with that persona in the SOC, and like what, or even on the opposite side, what fails to, you know, grab their attention or be
Yep.
useful in the buying process?
So a couple of things around that from the technology, especially for people who are more product marketing focused. Look at
Hmm.
that chart that I have, and I can give you which figure it is, but it's basically technology satisfaction.
Okay.
And if the technology is low in terms of technology satisfaction. So I have multiple different ones. So it's figure 14 grade point average is the one that I'm thinking of. If it's at the top and you're a product marketer, think about that from leveraging that as a hey, people like this, you should implement it, right? That
Okay.
kind of thing. If you're toward the bottom and you're trying to market that product nonetheless, you should think about it from the okay, fine. Generally, people aren't satisfied, but there are some people who are saying good things about it. Let me figure out where that particular tool is helpful to people and make sure that the people that you're trying to sell to match that profile.
Okay.
And that really, I don't do a lot of marketing for myself. It's not, I mean, I'm too busy and it's not
Yeah.
generally where I care, but I actually am quite good at marketing and sales if I set my mind to that. And the thing
Yep.
that is standard for that is find what's relatable, show success, and be able to demonstrate why that person cares about that particular tool. And
Right.
all tools have value and they fill specific gaps. And so really the question becomes, if people are dissatisfied, why are they dissatisfied? And it's usually a misalignment at the sales effort that makes it so that somebody's buying a thing, they think it's going to solve a problem for them and it doesn't. And it's like if I buy my power adapter because it's supposed to plug into my phone and it's not immediately obvious how to plug it in, I'm returning it if I can.
Hmm.
Just period.
Yeah.
Just I'm not going to think about it. So
Yeah.
if your tool is one of those things where it's like it requires a unique adapter, you better have that as part of the sales effort to show them how to plug it in and make it work. And if you don't have that, they're going
Yeah.
to tell
So
their
it's
their you
like,
know their peers like this thing sucks.
yeah, customer knowledge is the forefront, understanding your users, their
Mm-hmm.
pain points, mapping your technologies to meet that in a way that is easy
Yep.
to understand and concise. And yeah.
And if it requires some assembly, you better have assembly instructions of how to deploy it, or you better have
Right.
something clear of like this is what success means for
Hmm.
your purchase, and otherwise people are going to be
Yeah.
unhappy.
Reminds me of the early days of the SOAR market when that was taking off, and I was involved there in
Mhm.
2016 or so. I think the technology was at like 5% or less adoption. It was
Yep.
very new, but it really met a lot of customer demand and needs at that time. And so it was very attractive from a marketing perspective. But where there was a missing and a big gap was like, how do we explain how to deploy this and implement this? You need like very sophisticated engineers that understand these complex technologies sometimes to actually make use of it. So to your
Mhm.
point, you maybe the advice there is just making sure that you recognize, have that empathy. Maybe that's the word.
Empathy is a good way of expressing it, and then it's one of these things where it's not just empathy, but it's like sell it to them where you bundle, the first 20 hours of professional services for deployment, and that
Right.
20 hours it
Yeah.
just is how they stand up their team to do the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Empathy
can't
followed
do
by practical
that.
guidance. Yeah. It's like,
This is literally what you like when you buy this from me, to make sure that you do this. I'm going to tell you a personal anecdote because I just great example of this. I ride motorcycles. I've been riding motorcycles since I was 18. The first motorcycle that I purchased, I bought it from a dealership. I showed up, I picked up the dealership, picked it up at the dealership, and I asked the guy, as I'm picking up the motorcycle, okay, how do you drive this thing? And he looked at me, he was like, wait a minute, what? And I was like, yeah, I've never driven a motorcycle before in my entire life. And he just
right.
looks at me like, what? And I was like, I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
drive a standard. And he said, oh my God. He was just, he was just
Yeah.
like, what? And I didn't die, and it's like, but he had to train me in the parking lot how to drive a motorcycle. And then he's like, good luck, buddy. See ya.
Here are the keys. Yep.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I had already bought it, but like that's kind of a scary thing. And think about that from an automation tool that plugs into your environment.
Mm,
You're giving people this very dangerous thing that they could
right.
really hurt
Yeah.
themselves in their IT
Yeah.
stuff. And you're not giving them the right sort of training and on ramp and all that stuff. That's
Right. There's always that analogy of like automating a workflow that shuts down the CEO's laptop during a board
yeah,
of directors meeting or something.
exactly.
So, all right. What else we got here, Chris? We got the training gaps, we got PMM tips, cyber pros. We talked a lot about the survey, the future, covered so much good stuff. Any tips for the audience if they want to dig into this, the SANS SOC survey, or even get involved for the 2025 version?
Yeah, well, first of all, the website where I've tried to consolidate all the information is soc-survey.com. So that should be pretty easy to plug in. At that, the first link in there is to take the 25 survey. So if you work in a SOC and you haven't taken it yet, please do so. All of the previous year's reports are linked from that. And where feasible, the data that's available is linked in that web page as well. So that's kind of the easiest place if you have any interest. Go to that web page, and it's got all of the years of the stuff that I've done on it. And then if you have
Perfect.
questions, just ask me. I'm pretty easy to find online. So
And you're open on LinkedIn to requests
LinkedIn,
and
yeah,
meeting others and
yeah.
stuff like that? Okay.
That's a great place to contact me to start is LinkedIn, and Montance is the name of my company, and I know
Okay.
that that's pretty globally unique because when I found that name, I spent a lot of time finding something that it was kind of like Xerox, right? There was nothing out there called that previously, so it's basically a globally unique name. So.
And anything in the works for Sands or yourself at the RSA conference this year, or
No, the last RSA thing I did was in 2020 on that technology taxonomy. I'm always doing talks and things, just not at RSA this year, maybe next year.
all
Black
right?
Hat, another one. There's
Yes,
just
Black Hat,
just
DEF
just
CON, and
keep an eye out, and there's always things coming out from me. So
all right, Chris, I really appreciate your time here. That does it for this episode of the Cyber PMM podcast. Chris, thanks again for your time and insights. Really appreciate it, and hope to dig into the 2025 survey once it's released. I'm excited about it.
great, thank you, really appreciate it.